Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, distinguished guests, and of course, our survivors. We come together to remember, because the act of remembrance must not be about memory alone. It must also educate. It must answer the question, why remember? It has often been said that without understanding our past, we diminish our capacity to confront the present and shape the future. For most of you here today, the Holocaust is the past. It's history. But for the survivors, and for me, it is never past. It is always present memory. My parents, born in different parts of Poland, managed to survive the Holocaust. Their survival, as was true of everyone's survival, was miraculous. Between the two of them, they experienced and endured many infamous sights: the Lodz Ghetto, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau, among others. My father must have been a bold and gutsy young man, and based on advice from another prisoner who told him, "Tell them you have a trade," lied to the SS that he was a barber. My mother managed to stay with her two sisters throughout the ordeal, a miracle in itself, a bond of love and family that generated inner reserves of strength they desperately needed. My parents met in the chaotic moments of liberation, rescued by American GIs from a German prison train, almost certainly destined to a fate of death. But 75 years ago, they were not my parents. They were victims of the most brutal, systematic assault by any state on any people in modern times. 1942 was a momentous year of history. It began with a conference outside Berlin, where a small group of mid to high-ranking German officials met to plan the implementation of what they called the final solution of the Jewish question. There were only 15 people at the meeting. Imagine that, only 15 to plan the extinction of a people. Their plans focused on the establishment of extermination centers, the most famous being Auschwitz-Birkenau, which began its systematic killings that spring. As officials were making plans and coordinating train schedules, and as contractors worked constructing barracks, gas chambers, and crematoria, most could not have imagined what would soon befall them, nor could the world. By August of 1942, the US government received the first authoritative information that the Germans had developed a plan to murder every Jew in Europe. The State Department had the report confirmed within 3 months, but unfortunately tried to suppress the information. When word did get out, thanks to people like Rabbi Stephen Wise, some found it hard to believe. And sadly, even today, the shocking horror of it, the scale and scope of it, the unprecedented nature of it, make the Holocaust an easy target for the denialism of anti-Semites. By the end of 1942, the Germans and their collaborators had murdered almost 4 million Jewish men, women, and children, and millions of others deemed undesirable based on the Nazi racist ideology. Among those killed that year were probably my grandparents. I do not know. I do know that my parents taught me about survival, hope and resilience, about the possibilities of human nature, good and bad, and about the importance of memory. Memory is a part of the special bond of that our family shares. But they also taught me that memory is not enough. We must learn, we must reflect, we must question, and above all, we must always act. Thank you. We will now begin the candlelighting ceremony, and it will be my honor to invite Holocaust survivors, accompanied by members of Congress, to light the candles. We will be assisted in the ceremony by Shira Godin, a sophomore at Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School and a graduate of the museum's Youth Leadership Program, bringing the lessons home. Inspired by her grandmother, Nessie, a Holocaust survivor and museum volunteer, Shira hopes to become a role model and leader among youth in her community. I would like to ask Senator Roy Blunt to stand by the first candle. The first candle will be lit by Ruth Bernstein and Peter Feigl. Ruth's family fled from Berlin to Amsterdam and eventually got out on the last ship from Rotterdam to the US. Ruth's grandmother was denied a visa and was killed by the Nazis. Peter, also born in Berlin, fled with his family to Vienna, then Belgium, and then Vichy, France. His parents were murdered in Auschwitz. May I invite Senator Chris Coons to stand by the second candle. The second candle will be lit by Anya and Marcel Dreimer. Anya's family was deported from Poland to a Soviet forced labor camp, but they were eventually able to get to Ukraine, where they remained until the war. Marcel and his family were forced into the ghetto in Drohobych, Poland. They later escaped to a nearby village where they were hidden by a Ukrainian family, first in a stable and later in a hall. Anya and Marcel are both museum volunteers. Thank you. Senator Patrick Leahy, may I ask you to stand by the third candle. The candle will be lit by Rita Rubenstein and Helena Peabody. Rita was born in Romania and was deported with her family to a ghetto in Transnistria. Later, after bribing soldiers, they went to another ghetto and were helped by a local family until liberation. Helena was born in Krakow. Her mother obtained false documents from a priest for herself and her two daughters. They lived as Catholics, always fearing exposure until the end of the war. Rita and Helena are also both volunteers at the museum. May I invite Congressman David Kustoff to stand by the fourth candle. This candle will be lit by Irene Weiss and Manny Mandel. Irene was born in Czechoslovakia. After being forced into the Munkac ghetto, Irene and her family were deported to Auschwitz, where her mother and four of her siblings were gassed. Irene and her sister were selected for forced labor and survived a death march. Manny and his mother were among a group of Hungarian Jews traded for trucks and other material in negotiations between Adolf Eichmann and Rudolf Kastner, a member of the Jewish Rescue Committee. The group was deferred to Bergen-Belsen for 6 months, and later they were able to get to Switzerland. Both Irene and Manny volunteer at the museum. Thank you. Congressman Ed Royce, may I ask that you stand by the 5th candle? The 5th candle will be lit by Esther Starobin and Harry Markowitz. Esther was sent by her parents from Germany to England on a kinder transport. Her family was deported to a camp in France, and later her parents were sent to Auschwitz and killed. Harry was born in Berlin. Shortly before Kristallnacht, Harry and his family fled Berlin to Antwerp. Later, fearing he would be selected for forced labor, Harry's family moved the family to Brussels, where they separately went into hiding until liberation. Harry and Esther are also museum volunteers. Now I would like to ask Congressman Brad Schneider to stand by the 6th candle. The 6th candle will be lit by Marcel Hodak and Ray Goldfarb. Marcel and his family moved from Paris to Vichy, France, after the French citizenship of his Romanian-born parents were revoked. His family blended in with the local population, attended church, and survived there until liberation. Ray was born in Poland. Following the German invasion, Ray and her mother escaped to a nearby ghetto, then joined a group of partisans in the forest, surviving there until liberation. Both Marcel and Ray volunteer at the museum. Thank you all very much.